To get involved or not to get involved? 'Tis the question. Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. That's a Christmas tree. So I watched a clip on YouTube today from one of the Republican presidential candidates, Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm pretty sure that's how you say his last name. Somebody feel free to correct me. It was an interview he was doing with Piers Morgan. He was talking about how his foreign policy is basically to just not get involved, leave the rest of the world to itself. And while I don't necessarily agree with the position, he made an interesting point. How do you determine which conflicts to get involved in? That's a fair question. It's a huge question, actually. Because he made a point that while we are sending all this money and everything else to Ukraine, there are other conflicts around the globe that we not only don't get involved in, but we don't talk about. And some of them, in fact, involve our allies as the aggressors. And we don't get involved in them. So how do we justify that? But let's talk about this on a sort of a layperson's level, because quite honestly, the policy side of that is going to be nuanced. Quite frankly, why do we get involved with things on a country level? We get involved with things on a country level because it is in our national interest to do so, or we determine it to be in our national interest to do so. Why are we involved in Ukraine? Well, because it is in our national interest to check Russian expansion. Why is it in our interest to check Russian expansion? We know they tried to interfere in at least one of our elections. We suspect of them of interfering in other parts of our elections. And quite honestly, we suspect them of taking active steps to sow divisiveness in the country to their benefit. They are an active enemy participant against us. Nick, isn't China doing the same thing? Yeah, but China is more of an economic partner. And again, it's not in our economic interest. It is in our economic interest to check Chinese geographic expansion. For example, Taiwan is a key ally for us. China doesn't even recognize that Taiwan is a separate country. These are confusing issues to talk about, but on a geopolitical scale, on a policy scale, our politicians make decisions every day about what things to get involved in and what things to not get involved in, and then they come up with the story to sell it. So that raises a fundamental question for us as voters. How do we digest it? Let's take the Armenian genocide, just as an example. We all vaguely know what that is, and I vaguely know what that is. Why do we vaguely know what that is? Well, because frankly, the U.S. didn't really get involved. There was no geopolitical interest for us, and so we didn't get involved. We stayed out of it. But staying out of it meant that we left a lot of people to die. I'm not going to spell it out. I'm not going to say unalive. I'm not doing that. You want to bleep me? YouTube, go right ahead. So what do we do with that? How do we handle that from a moral perspective? Because certainly one conflict is not more morally right than the other. And in reality, if we're going to look at the way a lot of people in the United States look at borders, why do we care? Really, the borders of countries don't even exist. We should all just be one giant world country. There should be no rules. We should all just, and with no rules, that would mean conflicts like Ukraine are not so bad. Why? Because Russia didn't violate the legal boundaries of any country. They just walked in. They just walked. They took an extended walk. Now they took an extended violent walk. We should have problems with that, generally speaking. So what Vivek Ramaswamy is talking about is a policy of isolationism, which is essentially, look, we, the United States, are separated by oceans on both sides from a lot of the conflicts of the world. We should not be stretching ourselves to go try and get involved, and by getting involved, taking responsibility for those conflicts. Look at the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. When we toppled Iraq's government, we took on a moral responsibility to rebuild that country, a moral responsibility that we failed. We failed both ourselves and we failed the Iraqi people. We failed our veterans. We sent them to a conflict that would have no end. We did the same thing in Vietnam. We do this all the time. What's the best way to avoid in Iraq or Vietnam? Just don't get involved. So where does that leave us with conflicts like Israel and Palestine? Where? This is a very serious question. And it's a question that we're weighing today. We're not involved yet. We're involved as an ally and we're involved as an advisor and a broker. But what do we do? And if you think that we've gotten to 6 minutes into this podcast and all I've really done is ask questions, that's completely fair because that's all I have done. What's the right answer to the problems of the world? Frankly, the fact is there isn't. The United Nations was meant to be set up as a problem-solving forum for the world. The problem is it is in no country's individual interest to solve the problems of the other countries. So just briefly on international law. International law is only as good as your ability to enforce international law. So if you sign a treaty with another country, the treaty is only as good as the paper it's written on, because the moment the treaty is no longer in your interest, you just break it. And there's really no consequence to you breaking it. You might lose a trade. You might lose an economic partner. That might be a thing. Or you might not, quite frankly. Look at China. China and the US have probably violated 6 agreements back and forth with each other. But so many billions and trillions of dollars is traded between the two countries that it just doesn't matter. It is not in our national interest for Xi Jinping to continue his clear and present moves to consolidate geopolitical power inside of China. But we don't cut China off. We don't stop buying Chinese goods. We buy more Chinese goods. And China continues to use the US dollar and actually chooses to manipulate the US dollar. So where does this leave us? If we isolate ourselves from the world stage in today's world, we're really setting ourselves up for a lot of problems, but it also means that we take on a moral role in the world, because once you start getting involved, you can't stop getting involved. This is a fundamental policy question that's sort of getting lost in the hubbub of, will Trump be allowed to run in the 2024 election or not? Where are we left? Is isolationism wise? Is isolationism not wise? Can you partially isolate? Can you only get involved to a certain extent? Can you topple Saddam Hussein and then leave? Can you, I don't know, there are Americans who are still held hostage by Hamas. They're not held hostage by Palestinians. Calm down. They're held hostage by Hamas. That was a strategic decision made by Hamas to force a negotiation. So when your people go abroad and they're held hostage by a foreign entity, any foreign entity, not just Hamas, let's say they were held hostage by the Germans, what do you do then? If you're Jimmy Carter, you struggle. If you're Ronald Reagan, you prepare a military response. Are those options good, bad, ugly? I don't know. But I'm thinking about that this week because, well, it's a cloudy day and that's where my mind went. I don't have a good answer. I wish I did, because it's Christmas week and I'd like to have all cheery and happy answers, and I just don't. I just don't have an answer. Sound off. Let me know what you think, because it's going to be very important in 2024 when we decide who the next president is going to be, because that president is going to drive military policy, and we're either going to get driven away from active involvement in conflicts around the world, or we're going to get more involved. And if you get more involved, it's like if you give a mouse a cookie. If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a cup of milk. If he wants a cup of milk, he's going to need a napkin. Once he has a napkin, he's going to want another cookie. And on we go. And if you isolate, who knows what's going to end up at your door. That's what I got for you. I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. That's a Christmas tree. Have a great day.